Hello, dear listeners. Take a moment to look around you. The 21st century civilized society we live in appears glamorous and advanced on the surface. But beneath lies deep wounds and anxiety. Modern medicine has achieved remarkable progress. We live in an age where artificial intelligence diagnoses diseases, robots perform surgeries, and gene therapy is possible. Yet depression rates continue to rise annually. Suicide rates remain high, and people complain of inner emptiness. Psychology is no different. Countless therapeutic methods and counseling techniques have been developed, but fundamental human suffering remains unresolved. The economy is the same. Global GDP continues to grow, and technological advancement has improved productivity, but people still suffer from economic anxiety. The fear of lack seems to have deepened. Through social media, people constantly compare themselves to others' success and suffer from relative deprivation. Facing this reality, we ask, what is the true answer? In this audiobook today, I want to address two core themes: healing and provision. This is not simply an approach from a religious perspective. It addresses the fundamental needs and desires of human existence as philosophical and existential issues. The Bible introduces God as Jehovah Rapha in Exodus 15:26, meaning the God who heals. And in Philippians 4:19, it promises, "My God will supply all your needs according to his riches in glory in Christ Jesus." Let us explore together whether these two promises can be genuine answers to the fundamental problems of modern society, beyond mere religious comfort. Chapter 1: The Wounds of Modern People. Anatomy of Invisible Suffering. Looking into the hearts of people living in modern society, it's like an emergency room filled with invisible wounds. They appear fine on the outside, but deep wounds are festering within. Statistics are even more shocking. According to the World Health Organization, over 300 million people worldwide suffer from depression. In Korea's case, the suicide rate remains high among OECD countries. This is not merely an individual problem, but a societal one. The wounds of modern people can be divided into several layers. First, relational wounds. Paradoxically, in the social media age, people have become lonelier. Connected to hundreds of friends, yet genuine communication has decreased. The quality of social connection, as psychology describes it, has significantly declined. Britain even appointed a minister for loneliness. Second, identity wounds. As traditional value systems shake, people cannot answer the fundamental question, who am I? This is the malaise of modernity that philosopher Charles Taylor described. Third, anxiety about the future. Fear of an uncertain future, climate change, economic instability, the threat of artificial intelligence weighs down present life. Human wounds are not merely problems of chemical imbalance or cognitive distortion. They are ontological issues connected to fundamental questions like, what is human? And why should we live? The Bible describes God in Psalm 147 verse 3 as one who heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Here, brokenhearted is shabah in Hebrew, meaning a completely shattered state. Not merely low mood, but a state where existence itself is shattered to pieces. The wounds of modern people are similar to this shabah state, functioning on the outside but completely broken within. Such wounds cannot be healed by simple technical solutions. A deeper dimension of healing is needed. Chapter 2: The Limits of Medicine and Psychology. The Dilemma of Partial Solutions. The advancement of modern medicine is truly remarkable. We look inside brains with MRIs, edit genes, and even create artificial organs. Psychology is the same. Various approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy, psychoanalysis, and Gestalt therapy have been developed and have helped many people. But there is a fundamental limitation here: reductionist thinking. Reductionism is an approach that tries to explain complex phenomena through simpler elements. For example, explaining depression only as serotonin deficiency, or viewing anxiety merely as cognitive distortion. Of course, these elements are important, but humans are far more complex beings. Since philosopher René Descartes proposed mind-body dualism, Western medicine has been dominated by a perspective that separates body and mind. But recent research shows this separation is artificial. For instance, research on the gut-brain axis showing that gut microbiota affects the brain, or psychoimmunology research showing emotions directly impact the immune system. A bigger problem is that modern medicine and psychology mainly focus on symptom management, like trying to remove only the smoke from a burning building, leaving the fire, the root cause, untouched. Adding a slightly cynical perspective here, this is connected to economic interests. Pharmaceutical companies profit more from ongoing management than cure. If completely healed at once, they're no longer customers. The same goes for the psychotherapy industry. Long-term therapeutic relationships are economically more advantageous. In reality, many patients receiving psychiatric treatment continue taking the same medications or receiving ongoing counseling for years without experiencing fundamental change. This is not the fault of individual therapists or patients, but a limitation of the system itself. Another limitation is scientism, the mindset that recognizes as real only what can be measured by scientific methods. But there are aspects of human suffering and healing that cannot be fully captured by scientific methods. Love, meaning, hope, faith. For example, the placebo effect is one of the most mysterious phenomena in modern medicine. Fake drugs or fake surgeries can produce actual therapeutic effects. This shows that human belief and expectation actually affect body and mind. However, the current medical system doesn't systematically utilize these non-material elements. Psychology is the same. Most psychotherapy focuses on individual internal change, but humans are relational and social beings. No matter how much individuals change, sustained change is difficult if the surrounding environment or social context doesn't change. A more fundamental problem is that modern medicine and psychology tend to view humans like machines. The idea that problems can be solved by replacing broken parts or modifying programs. But humans are not machines. Humans are beings who seek meaning, long for relationships, and dream of transcendence. To overcome these limitations, a more integrated and holistic approach is needed. A perspective encompassing body and mind, individual and community, present and eternal. This is precisely where spiritual healing becomes important. The biblical concept of healing is not simply curing illness. As the Hebrew shalom implies, it means holistic peace and restoration, complete healing that includes not only individual inner life, but also relationships, community, and relationship with God. Chapter 3: Dimensions of Spiritual Healing. Theology of Multi-Layered Restoration. The most important thing in understanding humanity is that we are not beings composed merely of matter. Modern science tries to explain humans as aggregates of biological, chemical, and physical processes, but that alone cannot fully explain the mystery of human existence. The Bible sees humans as beings combining soul and body. Genesis 2:7 says, "The Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." Here, breath of life is neshama in Hebrew, meaning not simply oxygen, but God's life force. Therefore, true healing must be multidimensional. The document you uploaded also presents 4 dimensions. First, spiritual healing. This is healing at humanity's deepest dimension. Liberation from sin and guilt is salvation. Here, the concept of sin shouldn't be understood merely as violation of religious taboos. The Greek hamartia originally means missing the mark. That is, a state of deviation from the purpose and meaning of human existence. Existentialist philosopher Kierkegaard expressed this as the sickness unto death, a state of despair more fundamental than physical death, the despair of not becoming oneself, the despair of becoming a meaningless existence. The existential emptiness, or identity crisis, in modern psychology, is ultimately connected to this. Everyone needs confirmation that their existence is meaningful and valuable. This is not simply a matter of self-esteem, but ontological security. Second, emotional healing, recovery of wounded hearts. Bessel van der Kolk, pioneer of trauma research, said, "The body keeps the score." Psychological wounds are not merely matters of memory, but are inscribed throughout the entire body. Modern neuroscience shows that emotion and cognition cannot be separated. The limbic system, handling emotions, and the prefrontal cortex, handling thought, are intimately connected. Therefore, true change is difficult without emotional healing. Emotional healing, as the Bible describes, is not simply making one feel good. It's acknowledging deep wounds and pain while not letting them define our identity. True self-acceptance occurring in God's love. Third, physical healing. This is the most visible healing, what many people expect. But importantly, not all physical illnesses are immediately healed. The expression, according to God's will, is important here. Adding a slightly cynical perspective here, some modern Christian movements emphasize only physical healing, treating God like a vending machine. The simple formula that, if you just have faith, you'll definitely be healed, can actually wound those who aren't healed even more deeply. The Apostle Paul also prayed 3 times about his thorn in the flesh, but didn't receive physical healing. Instead, he received the response, "My grace is sufficient for you." This was experiencing grace at a deeper dimension than physical healing. Fourth, ultimate healing. This means complete restoration to resurrection bodies. The complete healing promised in Revelation 21:4. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. This doesn't mean present partial healing is meaningless. Rather, it means present healing is an already but not yet experience of tasting future complete healing in advance. The concept of inaugurated eschatology, as theologians call it. This multidimensional understanding allows us to view present suffering and healing in a broader context. Problems not immediately resolved can find meaning within the bigger picture. As psychologist Viktor Frankl said, "It's not suffering itself, but meaningless suffering that causes human despair." The dimension of spiritual healing gives meaning to suffering and presents hope beyond present limitations. Chapter 4. Modern society's material anxiety. Poverty amid abundance. For modern people, material abundance is no longer a dream. We enjoy conveniences and abundance our ancestors couldn't even imagine. We communicate with the entire world through smartphones, order desired items online, and artificial intelligence assists our daily lives. But paradoxically, material anxiety is actually increasing. What economists call relative poverty is one cause. Even as absolute living standards improve, the relative deprivation felt compared to others can actually grow. Social media has accelerated this phenomenon. Through Instagram and Facebook, we're constantly exposed to others' success stories. But most of those are edited reality, highlight reels. We feel deprived comparing others' best moments to our everyday lives. Economist Fred Hirsch presented the concept of social limits, things that everyone cannot simultaneously have, like homes in premium neighborhoods or ownership of luxury brands. These things are inherently based on scarcity, so even as society as a whole becomes wealthier, not everyone can be satisfied. Adding a slightly cynical perspective here, modern capitalism cunningly stimulates and reproduces this human desire. Marketing psychology has sophisticatedly developed techniques to make us feel we need things we don't actually need. Words like limited edition, premium, exclusive stimulate our possessiveness. A more serious problem is the impact of consumer culture on human identity formation. As the saying goes, you are what you buy. People try to define themselves by what they own. Luxury bags, high-end cars, latest smartphones become part of the self beyond mere tools. Behavioral economics research shows humans' irrational economic behavior well. According to Daniel Kahneman's prospect theory, people feel losses about twice as intensely as gains. This leads to excessive fear of loss. Also, due to present bias, people tend to pursue immediate gratification over rational long-term planning. This leads to problems like credit card debt and excessive loans. Modern people's material anxiety is not simply a problem of individual poor spending habits. Structural problems are intertwined. First, deepening income inequality. According to economist Thomas Piketty's research, when capital returns exceed economic growth rates, wealth concentration intensifies. This is a structural problem, difficult to overcome through effort alone. Second, employment instability. Many jobs are being automated by technological advancement, and stable employment is decreasing with the spread of the gig economy. Third, welfare system limitations. As traditional family communities weaken, the burden of individuals bearing all risks alone has increased. In this situation, many people enter endless competition for material stability. But this often leads to hedonic treadmill phenomenon, like running on a treadmill, feeling stuck in place no matter how hard you run. Psychological research shows that above a certain income level, the correlation between money and happiness greatly diminishes, but people still believe more material possession will bring greater happiness. Facing this reality, we realize we need a fundamental shift in perspective on material goods and abundance. Not simply owning more, but a different dimension of provision philosophy where we can find true satisfaction and peace. Chapter 5. Distorted perspectives on provision, prosperity, gospel traps, and materialism's deception. In modern society, perspectives on provision, or abundance, tend to divide into two extremes. One side is extreme materialism, the other is a distorted form of prosperity theology. Both perspectives have serious problems. First, let's examine the materialistic perspective. This is a worldview that measures human happiness and satisfaction solely by material possession. Based on the simple formula, the more you have, the happier you are. Consumer capitalism systematically reinforces this perspective. The advertising industry connects basic human needs with product purchases. Messages like, buy this product and you too can be loved, and wear this brand and you'll be recognized as successful, are constantly transmitted. According to behavioral economist Dan Ariely's research, people often make consumption decisions following social signals or others' behavior without even knowing what they truly want. The social proof principle at work. More cunning is lifestyle marketing, not simply advertising product functions, but selling a particular way of life or identity. Like Apple selling not computers, but the identity of being creative and innovative. Adding a slightly cynical perspective here, modern people often purchase identity packages pre-packaged by corporations rather than creating their own identities. This is merely self-consumption, far from true self-actualization. On the opposite extreme is a distorted form of prosperity theology. This views faith as a means to obtain material blessings. Mechanical, transactional thinking like, if you have faith, you'll become rich, or give tithes and receive back tenfold. This prosperity theology has several problems. First, it treats God like a vending machine. Put in prayers or offerings, and desired blessings should come out. Second, it mistakes material success for indicators of spiritual maturity. Third, it blames poverty or suffering on individual lack of faith, inflicting secondary wounds. As sociologist Max Weber analyzed in The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, the perspective of viewing material success as God's blessing has historically existed. But this is a partial, distorted interpretation different from the Bible's overall message. Jesus said in Luke 12:15, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." He also warned in Matthew 6:24, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Between these two extremes, modern people are confused. Completely rejecting material things isn't realistic, yet pursuing only material things leaves the heart empty. Another distortion is the scarcity mindset. This is a concept presented by psychologist Stephen Covey, thinking that all good things in the world are limited, so if someone else has it, I cannot. This breeds excessive competition, jealousy, and anxiety. Conversely, some extremize the abundance mindset, claiming that merely thinking positively will solve everything. This is a commercially distorted form of some positive psychology streams. True understanding of provision must transcend these extremes. A balanced perspective is needed, one that neither idolizes material things nor irresponsibly ignores them. Freedom from not being bound by material needs while acknowledging them. Wisdom to prepare for the future while being grateful for present provision. The provision philosophy the Bible presents offers this balance, a free way of living that trusts God while not being lazy, uses material things while not being possessed by them. Chapter 6. God's Provision. Philosophy, God's economics of opening storehouses. Malachi 3:10. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. Well demonstrates God's provision philosophy. But we shouldn't understand this verse merely as a promise of material blessing. Looking at the Hebrew original reveals even richer meaning. The expression "not room enough to store it" is belidai in Hebrew, meaning not simply quantitative abundance, but qualitative sufficiency. That is, provision that gives true satisfaction and peace. To understand God's provision philosophy, we must first examine creation theology. Looking at Genesis 1, the world God created was originally a sufficient world. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Economist Herman Daly emphasized in Steady-State Economics that Earth's resources are not infinite. But from a biblical perspective, the true source of provision is not the resources themselves, but God who supplies the resources. What's important here is the stewardship spirit, the concept that humans are not owners but managers of the earth. Psalm 24 verse 1 says, "The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world, and all who live in it." This connects to the modern concept of sustainable development, a long-term perspective considering not just current generation needs, but future generations. Chapter 7. Integrated Understanding of Healing and Provision. Ecosystem of Holistic Restoration. So far we've treated healing and provision as separate topics, but in reality they are intimately connected. True healing cannot be separated from provision, and true provision includes healing. To understand this, we first need to examine the Hebrew concept of shalom, usually translated as peace. Shalom doesn't simply mean absence of conflict. It means comprehensive well-being, including completeness, wholeness, harmony, and prosperity. Old Testament scholar Cornelius Plantinga Jr. defined shalom as the way things ought to be, everything in its proper place as God intended. A state where not only individual inner life, but human relationships, social structures, and natural environment all function harmoniously. From this perspective, healing and provision are like two sides of the same coin. At the psychological level, wounded hearts often manifest as feelings of lack. The wound of not being loved appears as endless need for recognition. The wound of abandonment appears as obsession with material possession. Conversely, experiencing true love and acceptance reduces excessive possessiveness. According to attachment theory, founder John Bowlby's research, secure attachment relationships in early childhood affect lifelong ability to regulate anxiety and greed. People who formed secure attachments are relatively less dependent on material things and more stable in relationships. At the social level, it's the same. Community wounds manifest as economic inequality, and economic problems breed social conflict and wounds. French economist Thomas Piketty's research shows economic inequality can harm social cohesion and threaten democracy itself. Conversely, when true economic justice is realized, social healing also occurs. Nordic countries' high happiness indexes are not simply due to high income, but also relatively equal income distribution and social security systems. At the spiritual level, it becomes even clearer. Humanity's deepest wound is existential loneliness from separation from God. As Augustine confessed, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." If relationship with God isn't restored, we try to fill that emptiness with everything else. Adding a slightly cynical perspective here, many addiction phenomena in modern society, shopping addiction, gaming addiction, SNS addiction, are ultimately attempts to fill this spiritual emptiness with other things. But no matter how much we fill it, that hole isn't sealed. At the ecological level, healing and provision also connect. Environmental destruction is Earth's wound, and sustainable development is Earth's healing. Simultaneously, a healthy environment enables continuous provision to humanity. Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si demonstrates this integrated perspective well, approaching environmental issues not merely as technical problems, but as spiritual and moral issues, calling us to hear together the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. This integrated understanding is important in practical application too. For example, if someone is experiencing economic difficulties, simply giving money may not be a fundamental solution. True restoration occurs when we also address that person's internal wounds, relational problems, and lack of skills or education. Conversely, when addressing psychological wounds, we cannot ignore economic reality. No matter how much counseling received, if livelihood remains unstable, anxiety will persist. Though Maslow's hierarchy of needs isn't perfect, the point that higher order needs can be pursued after basic physiological and safety needs are met remains valid. Looking at Jesus' ministry in the Bible, we find this integrated approach. Jesus healed diseases while saying, "Your sins are forgiven," fed 5,000 while teaching about the bread of life. Holistic ministry, where body and mind, material and spirituality weren't separated. This integrated understanding connects to the modern social economy movement. Examples include companies pursuing social value realization alongside profit, fair trade, cooperatives, social enterprises. Ultimately, the integration of healing and provision previews the image of God's kingdom. Chapter 8. Practical application and facing reality, bridging the gap between theory and life. We've examined theoretical and theological perspectives on healing and provision. But no matter how perfect the theory, if not applied to actual life, it remains empty ideation. Reality often differs from our ideals, and sometimes there seems a large gap between faith and reality. First, we must honestly acknowledge certain things. First, not all prayers are answered. No matter how earnestly we pray, sometimes illness doesn't heal. Economic difficulties persist. Explaining this as lack of faith or praying wrong can inflict additional wounds. Even Apostle Paul prayed 3 times about his thorn in the flesh but wasn't healed. Instead, he received the response, "My grace is sufficient for you." This shows God's provision, and healing may differ from how we expect. Second, even with faith, realistic problems still exist. Having faith doesn't automatically solve all problems. Medical bills still need paying. Living expenses must be earned, and relationship conflicts must be wisely resolved. Adding a slightly cynical perspective here, in some faith communities, acknowledging or expressing realistic difficulties itself is considered faithless behavior. But this isn't biblical. Much of the Psalms consists of honest expressions of realistic pain and difficulty. Third, balance is needed between individual effort and God's grace. Both the mechanistic belief that pray and sit still and God will do everything is problematic, and the self-help mentality that I must solve is problematic. Everything myself is problematic. Proverbs says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise." We must depend on God while fulfilling our responsibilities. Chapter 9. Hope toward the future. Ultimate healing and eternal provision. So far, we've mainly addressed present healing and provision. But from a biblical perspective, the most important thing is ultimate hope. That present partial and incomplete experiences are preludes toward future complete realization. Revelation 21:4 clearly shows this ultimate hope. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. This is not simple comfort or escape. It doesn't mean ignoring or resigning to present suffering. Rather, it means all present efforts and struggles have ultimate meaning. Let's examine dimensions of ultimate healing. First, complete physical restoration. The resurrection body. Paul explains in 1 Corinthians 15 is qualitatively different from present perishable bodies. Glorious bodies without disease, aging, or death. No matter how advanced modern medicine becomes, human lifespan has limits, and aging is unavoidable. But the Bible promises even these limits will be overcome. This doesn't make present medical efforts meaningless. Rather, all efforts to restore God's creation purpose can be seen as connected to future complete realization. Second, complete emotional peace. No more mourning or crying means all psychological wounds and trauma will be completely healed. The limitations of present psychotherapy and counseling are also overcome here. Wounds that cannot be completely erased, no matter how good the treatment, repeating patterns of pain, all will be healed. Third, complete relational restoration. Not only relationship between humanity and God, but all relationships between humans, between humanity and nature, will be completely restored. The relational pains we experience, loneliness, betrayal, conflict, misunderstanding, will all be resolved. A world of complete peace as described in Isaiah 11, where the wolf will live with the lamb and the lion will eat straw like the ox, will be realized. Dimensions of eternal provision are the same. First, infinite resources. In the New Jerusalem of Revelation 22, the river of the water of life flows, and the tree of life bears 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. Complete provision without lack or shortage. The economic anxiety we experience, resource limitations, environmental destruction, all will be resolved. But this doesn't make present environmental protection or sustainable development efforts meaningless. Rather, it can be seen as ultimate completion of our stewardship mission, caring for God's creation. Second, complete satisfaction. Psalm 17:15 says, in righteousness, I will see your face. When I awake, I will be satisfied with seeing your likeness. God himself will be our complete satisfaction. Our endless pursuit of material possession or achievement will be completely fulfilled. No more feeling insufficient or anxiety about must have more. Adding a slightly cynical perspective here, present consumer culture whispers, we can experience this complete satisfaction right now. Promises, buy this product and you'll be completely satisfied, but actually only creates new dissatisfaction. True satisfaction can be found only in God. Third, meaningful activity. Many mistakenly think heavenly life means boring existence playing harps on clouds. But the new world the Bible describes is filled with dynamic and creative activities. Revelation 22 says, his servants will serve him, meaning meaningful work and ministry will continue. All good work we do now will have eternal meaning. What meaning does this ultimate hope give to the present? First, change perspective on present suffering. Romans 8:18 says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. This doesn't mean ignoring present pain, but understanding it in a larger context. Second, giving meaning to present efforts. 1 Corinthians 15:58 says, Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Third, power not to despair. No matter how desperate the situation, there's hope that this is not the end. Confidence in God's final victory gives strength to endure present darkness. Ultimately, our hope for healing and provision is God himself. Revelation 21:3 promises, Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. Complete realization of Emmanuel. Conclusion. Completion in eternal perspective. God's kingdom already begun. We've taken a long journey together, starting from modern people's wounds and anxiety, examining limits of medicine and psychology, exploring God's healing and provision philosophy, addressing practical application and ultimate hope. One core message runs through all this content. God is the one who heals and provides in all areas of our lives, and this is part of a complete plan encompassing present and eternity. But there's an important point we must not miss. This is not simply a message of personal blessing or comfort. God's healing and provision are always connected to a larger purpose, the expansion of God's kingdom. Looking at the Lord's Prayer, Jesus taught in Matthew 6, personal needs and God's kingdom purposes appear together. Our personal needs and God's cosmic purpose are not separated. This gives important implications for modern society. First, we must move beyond individualistic faith. Many modern religious approaches tend to focus only on individual success or satisfaction. But from a biblical perspective, healing and provision always include communal and social dimensions. Second, we must not dichotomously divide this world and the next. The approach that only spiritual things matter and material things don't, or conversely, that only realistic things matter and spiritual things are meaningless, is not biblical. God desires holistic restoration, encompassing soul and body, individual and society, present and future. Third, active participation is needed, not passive expectation. Not sitting idle, waiting for God's healing and provision, but joining God's healing and provision work ourselves, comforting the wounded, helping the poor, working to change unjust structures. These are also ways to experience God's healing and provision. It's becoming increasingly clear that many problems of modern society cannot be fundamentally solved by technical or political solutions alone. Deeper spiritual and ethical change is needed. Adding a slightly cynical perspective here, many solutions in modern society actually remain at the level of managing symptoms without touching root causes of problems. Antidepressants may alleviate depression symptoms, but don't resolve depression's root causes: meaninglessness or relational disconnection. Economic support may solve immediate livelihood problems, but doesn't resolve structural inequality or lack of meaningful work. God's healing and provision philosophy presents answers at this fundamental level. Not simply managing symptoms, but pursuing holistic change, encompassing human purpose and meaning, relationships and community, present and eternity. Of course, we must acknowledge such change isn't easy. Even at the individual level, changing habits and shifting perspectives requires long time and effort. At the social level, even more complex and difficult processes will be needed. But what's important is beginning. Rather than waiting for perfect solutions, starting with small things we can do now. Personally, cultivating gratitude habits, practicing sharing, seeking healing for one's wounds. Communally, caring for each other, speaking for social vulnerable, working to create a more just and sustainable society. The Bible expresses God's ultimate purpose in Ephesians 1:10, to bring unity to all things in heaven and on earth under Christ. This means everything being restored according to God's original creation purpose. The healing and provision we experience are preludes to and participation in this ultimate restoration. Imperfect and partial, yet nonetheless meaningful and precious experiences. Thank you for joining me for this long time. I hope this audiobook has been even a small help to your life. Above all, I hope it becomes an opportunity to experience God's love and grace more deeply. Healing and provision are a journey, not a destination. More than finding perfect answers, the process of walking with God itself is important. All experiences met in that process will have meaning within God's big picture. Thank you again, and I pray God's abundant blessings be with you. Thank you.